Hello there, everybody. I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and thank you for stopping by for episode number 66 of the weekly Ratchet. In this episode, we're going to chat about how lucky we are to play board games, or maybe how lucky some board games can be to play. Either way, we're going to let the chips fall where they lie right here on the weekly Ratchet. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining me here on episode number 66 of the Weekly Ratchet. As always, I hope you've had a fantastic week of getting to play some games with family and or friends. I don't even know where to start with this episode. I just got done finishing the B-roll for my review of Great Western Trail 5. Neither great nor Western. The El Paso sort of version, variant, whatever, of the Great Western Trail universe. Just finished filming that. Got everything set back up to film this episode, and then they showed up to start mowing my grass, so I'll have to edit all the audio out of this episode. Can't wait to do that. Anyways, just a lot going on. It's been a little bit of a crazy week here. Well, a crazy week. It's Monday, and I feel like it's been a nutso week already. Anyways, you know what? I don't have any new games to talk about at the top of the show, so that'll help us out here a little bit. I was hoping to show you some new shinies, but they're not going to show up until maybe tomorrow or Wednesday, so we have to check those out in the next episode. As far as the next episode goes, it'll be right after 4th of July. We're going to be doing some traveling. There's going to be a lot going on that weekend, so next week's episode will air, but it'll probably be a little into the following week before that shows up. The good news is that one of my local buddies is doing an event here in town he affectionately calls Rocket Con. I don't know why. Maybe I'll find out. But we'll be getting together a couple days over the upcoming weekend to play a lot of games. So hopefully I have some neat stuff to chat about. Hopefully a lot of stuff you have not heard about here before on the show in games I don't even have. Civolution might be on the docket. I'm anxious, a little nervous, a little anxious to check that one out. But we will see. Anyways, enough about all that. Let's go ahead and jump to question of the week. All right, last week I asked you to tell me how protective you are of your board games. And it's kind of funny because one of the answers here is right on topic of what inspired this question in the first place. So up first is Teshra, who said he could be extra protective of his games, but since it's mostly him and his wife playing, he doesn't have to worry about someone in a game group being messy. He also added that since they might play their games 8 times a year, how bad can it get? That is really how I think about a lot of this stuff. I play these games so rarely that I don't see the point in like trying to sleeve all the cards or, going through all this work to sort of preserve everything because some of these games only ever get played once. So, I kind of see that point of view. Troy Herring explained his reason for asking everyone to wash their hands before playing, as he feels playing cards can become a petri dish of germs hiding in your bookcase for who knows how long. It's a pretty interesting way of looking at things. I never really quite thought about that myself. A lot of your just general germs do die off after a couple of hours, maybe a few days. I guess there could be enough dampness maybe stuck in those boxes. I've never really heard of anything like that happening, but it's an interesting point of view. Rentless said he sleeves his games and insists on not having any greasy food on the table, but also understands that games are meant to be played, not collected. And I think we're going to see a lot of comments kind of in that vein, right? A lot of these folks were kind of like, be careful, but I'm not going to gold dome my my games. Brandon Graham said his number one goal is for people to have fun, so he hopes for the best. He does ask people to maintain a pizza hand, presumably a hand for foods that doesn't touch the game, and did lament one story where a piece of cake was dropped on his Kickstarter copy of Moonrakers. I do have a funny story about food on games, which I will definitely get to here in a moment. C.R. Pohl said he doesn't own a lot of games, but wishes there was a way to play games while keeping them in shrink wrap. Oddly, however, he does not sleeve his games, as he says it'd be a never-ending quest for perfection. It is funny that you say that, the comment about keeping the games in shrink, because that is the sort of a post that I saw on social media for someone who said that they did just that. They take the games, they cut the shrink, and they cut it kind of in a way that it keeps like a little bit of a flap, and then they fold it on the inside of each lid and tape it so that when they put the lid back on the games, it still looks like the game is in shrink, except for, of course, the back. And a lot of people were just commenting like, Okay, that's a little weird. Like the one comment I thought was pretty funny was, well, do you put all the cardboard pieces back into the punch boards? Which funny, tee hee ha ha, whatever. But it's kind of like, I don't know. I think a lot of folks, including myself, felt like that's a bit much. I know I can see the point, but I also kind of feel like I like to be able to see the art on the boxes. It was kind of meant to be, not through shiny plastic and glare and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. That's just me, though. JW Spiker mentioned a few concerns surrounding children, like his 8-year-old son wanting to smash miniatures together and a friend's daughter wanting to chew on a piece from the game Ink and Gold. He said he's protective of some games and less protective of others, primarily just aiming to make sure all the pieces are accounted for. Yes, kids. I've been very fortunate. I mean, ever since my daughter was young, she kind of grew up with games. She's never been a problem. She's always been very well behaved. We have had a couple kids who've come over on game nights, and all of a sudden you see a kid just kind of throwing cards all over the place, or just doesn't really respect them, doesn't really care about it, so doesn't respect them. Yeah, kids can be an issue. Red Panda also mentioned an ultimate desire to make sure he has all the pieces, saying that he's only protective of his more expensive games, like the new Castles of Burgundy. I've definitely had those games. In fact, another quick funny story, my copy of Twilight Imperium 4th edition, which I played just a couple weeks ago in one of the previous episodes, I got everything all set up. And in the process of getting out the player pieces, and actually, my players had picked their faction, I was actually missing a home planet, and I had just punched the game like 2 or 3 days prior. I still have no idea where that tile went. I actually had to find one on eBay. But yes, there is that feeling when you suddenly realize you are missing a piece of a game, especially a very specific printed, punched out piece. You cannot just go and get a replacement cube or a replacement coin. You're missing something very specific to that game. It can be quite worrying, for sure. I understand. Yukon Zach said he doesn't consider himself to be overprotective, asking only for beverages to be lidded, quote, in the event of overexuberance in arm activity, end quote. I thought that was pretty funny. I'm fortunate in the big table behind me that we typically use for gaming is one of those game topper systems with the tracks on the side. We have got the cup holders in there, but even if I'm playing on maybe a smaller player count, I will sometimes have a drink on the table, maybe like a rocks glass or something like that, or a Glencairn glass, for a nice whiskey or bourbon or something like that. I have gotten in the habit, oddly enough, of kind of crane reaching for everything I do. Like I've kind of just made sure, sort of developed this habit to reach over, which it looks pretty funny on my monitor even to do, but somehow I've gotten in the habit of it. Because you're absolutely right. You kind of all of a sudden go, oh, I forgot to do this, or when I put that card, and you knock your whiskey all over the table, and that can be sad in more ways than one. Wonderflonium presented an interesting concept, having different shelving units for kid games and his own games. He said his copy of Mage Knight is unscathed, while his main board for Downforce is now in 2 pieces. Yeah, I tell you, it's those kids. All my games would be fine if it wasn't for those mangy kids. No, and we have another story coming up, too, about another potential problem to gaming, which I did think was pretty interesting. Richard said he will judge your riffle shuffle, but will be too polite to intervene. I've only got one story. I do riffle shuffle my cards. I try to be careful about it, of course. I've only ever had one person say, hey, don't shuffle my cards too much. And I've also had a couple people who like to ask, like, hey, do you mind if we riffle shuffle? I say, no, it doesn't really bother me. We just played Underwater Cities over the weekend, one of those games with a ton of cards to them. And it's like, if you're sitting there trying to, somehow shuffle them without riffle shuffling, you're going to be there forever. And again, when you're playing your game a couple times a year, maybe, it's not really doing that much harm. They'll kind of recollect. The sort of natural warp to the cards will eventually settle back in, and they'll be fine. Anyways, Penny said she is quite protective of her games, insisting on no drinks at the table, no sticky fingers, and no crumbs. Even so, she said the intro sheet for their first game of Clank Legacy fell victim to her sister's dog when it fell on the floor just last week, and it was as if Penny was having an out-of-body experience. And for those wondering, Penny said she did forgive the dog. Yeah, so I was going to say, kids and pets, man. That's why I do adults and cats. I'm kidding, of course, but I've heard similar stories. So I tell you, You just never know when it's going to happen. The Awkward Meeple also confessed to being quite protective of games, installing cup holders below the main table, taking breaks for snacks, and insisting on washing hands before returning to the table. He added that he cringes at the riffle shuffle and closed with, "My precious." and you know, definitely one of those things where you're going to see people on all ends of the spectrum. I've even seen someone freak out when someone started to fold their rule book backwards to try and just focus on one page, and I can kind of get that, you know, for some games. I'm definitely one, as we've kind of seen here, it really depends on the game for me. Some stuff I just don't really worry about. Lastly, Jeremy Brooks said he's had to step up in terms of protecting his games, as a newly opened copy of Flashpoint Fire Rescue got soda spilled on it at a recent game night. He added that they break for snack time so that there's no food at the table. Personally, I try to eat before we even start gaming. I had to get together over the weekend, and I kind of sat there real quick and sort of ate a quick dinner, a quick snack, and then got the game out. And it also reminds me that I still need to play Flashpoint. I have not gotten to that game yet. So a quick funny story I like to share. I used to do a game night at a local pub down a little more into the city called Three Notch, and we were playing a game of Meadow one night. I had a couple of colleagues there, actually from work, and there was one particular young woman who was there, very, very, very attractive young woman, and we were playing Meadow, and we were sort of a little slow. It's a long game anyways. We had a full 4-player count. And she was sitting there. We all kind of had our beers and drinks. It was getting a little late. We were running out of time. We didn't think we were going to finish the game. We didn't finish the game. And she was telling everyone, hurry up, come on, hurry up, get your turn, get done. All right, fine. And in all of her excitement, she knocks over her stout, a Russian Imperial Stout, onto the rule book for Meadow. Now, as I mentioned, very attractive young lady. And every guy in that bar came running over with napkins, cloth, some of their own damn t-shirts. "Ma'am, are you okay? Are you okay? Ma'am, are you all right? You okay?" And I was like, screw her, save my game. I've told that story many times in her presence, and she always gets a laugh out of it. She's like, "No, I was actually with you on that one. Get away from me, save the game." So I can appreciate that, but that's definitely been one of those stories that has always sort of stuck in my mind. Is, okay, hang on, let's make sure the game components are safe. Yeah, we've all sort of been there, right? Anyways, that was Question of the Week. Thanks for all the participation. Let me go ahead and tell you about some games I've played recently. All right, moving along here pretty quickly. Up first, as I had hoped to play, we did get to play Pergola from Rebel Studio. This is the most recent game from Rebel Studio, and interestingly enough, it is the same artist as Meadow. And so this game kind of caught my eye just because of how this cover looked, and I was interested in checking this one out. Now, I'll tell you real quick, I just got the lid here because I just started to pick up the box in a previous clip, and I heard the pieces moving, and that's when I remembered that in this box is this tray that holds all your pieces. That's about as far as I can tilt it, and there's no lid. So if I had stood this up and all this stuff had fallen out of here, you'd have seen a grown man cry on camera. So yeah, just the lid, here it is. Anyways, this is a very, very lightweight game where you're trying to simply build a garden. What's kind of neat with this is that your player board is just an open board. You've got spaces for multiple different types of flowers, hollyhock bushes, lavender bushes, other things I can't even quite remember. You're trying to attract butterflies on the hollyhock, ladybugs on this other type of bush, and then bees that can either hang from, it's not honeysuckle, I cannot remember what the heck the name of the plant is. And then there's also lavender bushes, which the bees can go in as well. If you have enough of the bees in the garden, then you can start to fill up these honey pots, and they'll give you some potential in-game scoring opportunities. There's also a lily pad, which is actually there on that tray, you saw it. And you have a frog, and that frog can kind of jump around the lily pad, which might trigger you getting either, usually I think it's all the insects. You also have a sort of rock feature with water coming down it, and you can move these water droplets down the rock feature to, again, trigger more insects that can come in your garden. And a lot of the actions are triggered by these gardening tools that you're simply drafting. You get a couple of the things that are on that gardening tool, and then there's a tile underneath the tools that gives you an action that you get to take based on which of those tools that you draft. Very, 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 very simple. we found, of course, early in the game, not surprising, that we start to have these ideas. Okay, well, I'm going to get a bunch of these, I'm going to need a bunch of these, and you get all these bugs, and I'm going to make a lot of honey, get some in-game scoring. There's also these lanterns that you can get. The lanterns will usually be triggered by the gardening tools themselves. You'll get the lanterns, you can just kind of put them, again, anywhere on your board. There's no predetermined spaces for anything to go except for where the honey pots sort of sit, and the plants that go above them, ideally to sort of, collect your honey into these honey pots. Other than that, it's just an open board. You can put stuff anywhere that you want. But anyways, these lanterns can be triggered at any point on your turn to potentially take an extra action. I'm sorry, there are just lawnmowers and weed whackers everywhere. I hope you cannot hear this stuff. Anyways, what we were a little bit surprised by is, again, just how light this is. You have decision space, but not really that much. Of the 4 actions that you can take, the first one is very, very, ineffective, almost useless, if you will. It's simply a way to take insects that didn't have a place to go when you got them and put them where you would want them to go. And I think in the entire game, my wife and I took that action maybe 1 time each. And so you just don't feel like there's really a whole lot that you can do. There are things that you're striving for, but the game also ends very, very, very quickly. And so I think looking back that, you've got to focus on just 1 or 2 things and try and do that as much as you possibly can. We also found our scores to be very, very tight, which did not surprise me. I believe I won this game by 1 point, which, again, we started playing this, I was like, okay, yeah, this is going to be a really, really tight scoring game. Very, very pretty. I did enjoy it. Just very, very light on options, very, very light on strategy, a very, very relaxing, chill game if that's the kind of thing that you're looking for. You might want to check out Pergola by Rebel Studio. All right, up next. So this is one of the games I picked up at Origins Game Fair. This is Sail from Allplay. This is a 2-player trick-taking game. I didn't really know anything about it. I knew that it was very popular, and so we actually took this to the Cask and Stave sort of pub or speakeasy here in town over the weekend, and we got to check this one out. Not quite sure how I feel about this one. So basically all you're trying to do in a 2-player cooperative game, only plays 2 players, is you're trying to get from one end of this sort of stretched out board to the other end of the board. And it's really just a square-based map, but it's kind of skewed to sort of represent like little diamonds. So you don't typically move in a straight line. You're either going to be moving up or down, crossing into a perpendicular, or a orthogonally adjacent space on the board, although there are ways that you can basically skip a straight line forward, but it's really, really tricky to do. So the idea is with this being a trick-taking game, there are only 3 suits, and they're just colors of cards. There's a green, there's a blue, and then there's this kind of weird gray color. We were playing in a dimly lit environment, you can probably see in some of these pictures, and it was a little hard to tell these cards apart. But you're going to play a color, whoever is opening that trick, and your opponent's going to, or your opponent, your other player, is going to play a card, hopefully of the same color. If you can, you have to play the same color, unless you, of course, don't have any. There's no concept of like a trump suit or anything like that. And it's simply whoever plays the highest number wins the trick, but there's really nothing for winning the trick. The idea is that you're playing these cards. Each card has a number value, 1 to 9, but they also have a symbol. You might have a ship's wheel, a yoke. You may have a kraken tentacle, you may have a cannon symbol, and there's a mermaid tail. I think that's really it. If you both play a card with a ship wheel on it, then your ship will move, and it will move in the direction of the player who won the trick. If you play a cannon symbol, well, then it kind of depends on what else you play. If you play a cannon symbol against a card that has a kraken tentacle, then that damages the kraken by simply moving that card to a separate deck that's on the table that represents the kraken in the game. And those will be all of your 1, 2, or 3 value cards. If you play it against another cannon, if you have 2 cannons, then they sort of not only cancel each other out, but you're going to draw the top card of any cards left in the player deck. And based on what the symbol is that you draw, you'll do something. Again, either maybe damaging a card, maybe making a movement forward on, again, in the direction of who won that trick. Or if you get lucky and draw the mermaid's tail, you'll get to move directly 1 space forward. And if you manage to play certain cards, especially like the mermaid tail, if you manage to get 2 of those played, you also get to move straight forward, which is basically 2 movements in one, which is really nice. But the only way that you can do that, because there's only one of those cards in each of the 3 suits, is that you have to know that your opponent is out of cards of a color, play that color, so that they can then play the mermaid tail of another color. But again, it's one of those games where you're not allowed to communicate. You can't talk. You can't say what you're doing and what's going on, which of course does make the game incredibly difficult, but also just not really all that much fun. And it's very, I mean, I was sitting there, we played 2 rounds of this. We did a tutorial round. We were successful in that one. We played them, mission 1, and we failed that one. And it was so hard for me to wrap my head around, how do I play this mermaid tail? Like, I passed one to my wife. There's this idea when you deal the cards at the beginning of each round, you get to swap a card. And, you can communicate to your player with this as to, but you can't. Like, you're not really, I'm passing you a green mermaid tail. Does that mean that I don't have any green cards? You have no idea. And so, I don't know. We really struggled with this. I couldn't really figure out, again, that kind of idea of deduction, like, sort of by what you're playing, what is it telling me that you have? I have no idea. There's also only a couple cards that have the wagon wheels. For example, the 6, 7, and 8, which means if I have the 7 and the 8, you've got the 6. We're only going to win one of those tricks. Only one of those is actually going to be a pair of, I said wagon wheel. Only one of those is going to be a pair of the ship wheels that's going to let us move. I'm going to play the other wheel later, and I know you don't have any wheel cards. Or maybe you don't have any of them because not all the cards get dealt. You have, you still have a couple cards left in the deck. Anyways, I'm rambling, but this game was weird and it didn't really click with us. I'm sure we'll try it out again, but when I think of some of the other co-op games we have, like Sky Team, this one just felt so obtuse that I don't know. I need to try and do some more research and figure out what's the right way to play it. Speaking of co-op games, my family and I played several games of Bomb Busters in this past week. I've talked about this one a bunch already. Daughter still loves this game. We've played it, I think, from 4 to 6 times. I don't quite remember, but we've still failed a lot of missions. And I am seeing that there's a big element of luck to this as well, because sometimes you might deal out in a way that, I've got 4 of a number and I could just, boom, solo cut all those wires in one shot and we're good. Or someone marks a wire that I have 3 of, and so I can go ahead and cut the one that you have. I can solo cut the other 2, and again, we've just knocked out a whole series of numbers. Sometimes you get like a big clumping of just a couple numbers in your sort of tableau, and again, it's fairly easy. You knock them all out fairly quick. Sometimes you get one where I literally have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it's like, good luck, finding that one wire that's in my display. So we love the game. Definitely love the game. We've had a couple games, though, where, we've had to use every little tool. We've had to really just kind of guess a couple times, and we barely got by. And we've had other games where we finish up, and we haven't used any of the equipment. We've just had an easy round of it. It really just kind of depends on how those tiles get distributed. Really love especially the red wires. The red wires create a ton of tension in the game and do make it pretty fun. We did the exam last night, which is mission number 8. Of 66, and we kind of failed it. My daughter did point to a tile and said, that's an 8, and it wasn't. And I said, do you want to rethink about that? Because it would have blown us up. But we're still going to redo it. Probably not tonight, but we're going to try and get to it here as soon as we can. Having a lot of fun with Bomb Busters. Okay, a couple more of the recent games that I've acquired. So first up is Biome. My wife and I played this one. Now, I mentioned this in the last episode. Got this from Origins. Did a demo there at their booth, and now got to sit down and play a full game of this. Now, I was looking into, there's a couple of variants in here. There's actually, the main board is 2-sided, so you can play a version where you're, I think it's your fall and winter. Basically, nothing happens, and then spring and summer is you're putting down these nests, and you got to feed your babies, all that kind of stuff. And in the fall round, there's a stage where you have to like pass cards to your neighbors, and then in the winter round, like none of your reptile cards get to do anything. I don't know. I was reading through some of those variants, and I thought, those don't sound more interesting. It sounded like a lot more randomness and a lot more, interaction, but not in a way that really makes interaction fun. So we decided to just play the basic mode of play. Again, another game heavily based on luck. So you've got these 3 biomes, marsh, prairie, and jungle. You're trying to get cards played in these things. There's this idea where if you have a tree, and you play a bird next to that tree, that bird will build a nest in that tree in the spring. Then in the summer, it'll have its babies. But any predators may come and try to eat those babies, and so on and so forth. And of course, every baby that a predator eats gives the predator player points. That was a tongue twister. And every baby that survives and you manage to then feed will get you points. I had a whole bunch of trees in my tableau. I only ever had 2 birds, my starting bird, and I got 1 other bird. I was never able to even find any more bird cards, and by the time I did, I didn't have a good place to play them. And so that felt a little weird. There's also bunnies. Bunnies can build burrowed nests. They use the same little nest token. And all these photos that you're seeing are from the deluxe game, but even the base game does have these neat little straw nests that it comes with. But there are bunnies that can build these nests next to any plant. I went the entire game and never saw a single bunny card. And so again, it's this kind of idea, I think of games like Everdell, I think games like Wingspan, so many of these massive deck of card games where it's just completely random as to what you're going to be able to do based on what you draw out of the deck. And even though there were a lot of ways to draw cards in this game, still, I went round after round after round, never getting the stuff I needed. There were a bunch of goals that were out there on the main board that were actually requiring you to have a variety of different cards in those different biomes, and none of us pulled them off. And so it's kind of like, you're sitting there and you're trying to work to something, but it never materializes because you literally never draw the cards. We still had fun playing it. My wife liked it, which I kind of thought that she would. For me, I just wish that there was a bit more predictability in what you would be able to do. Very pretty game. Rules are a little wonky, but that is Biome. Next. So actually, I think this may have been earlier in the week, but anyways, we sat down and played the Lunar Rush expansion Innovations. I mentioned that this is a prototype of the expansion from Dead Alive Games. One of my good buddies, Jeff Foxwell, came over and we played this. So what this one does, in a quick nutshell now, Lunar Rush, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in the previous episode, but it is a game where you are building a base. You have a base on the moon. It's kind of preliminarily established. You need to sort of build it up throughout the game. And then you're shipping materials from Earth to the moon to help you build that base up a little quicker, including astronauts, giving you more things that you can do up there in that moon base. And ultimately, you're trying to extract 2 ores. I believe they're made up, Luminarium and Lunathist, or Lunarium and Lunathist. And there's 2 different versions of each ore. So you've kind of got like the basic cheapy version, and then a very premium refined version. You then have to ship those materials back to Earth and sell them on a market, and the market lowers its price as more of those items are sold. And so those items become less and less valuable throughout the game. There is a small mechanism where the market kind of refreshes, but even in a 3-player game, we found that did not really trigger all that much. Now, in the expansion, each of your factions becomes asymmetrical, and there are actually now 5 factions. It also adds a 5th player, and I think I mentioned, I may not have, that one of the factions adds an element where you're chucking dice with each of the things that you produce. So you put workers on your moon base. Okay, this is going to generate life support, basically food or energy or those ores or other materials that you need to upgrade your base. But everything that you're going to do with that one particular faction requires rolling a die. And I knew immediately that it was not the faction for me. The other one has a significant reduction in workers. You only have 2 workers at the start. You only go up to 6 workers, as opposed to everyone else goes up to 10. But their workers do much more powerful actions. It's kind of like this cyborg faction. I did a faction where I was robots, so I didn't need any life support. I just needed energy, and a lot of it. And at the end of every round, I had to repower all my robots, spending all my energy. So I needed a lot of energy to build the base, a lot of energy to get my resources, and a lot of energy to keep my workforce going. And I eventually got up to 20 robots, and so it was quite a lot of work to manage the energy supply of that, that faction. My wife had a faction where she had a standard 10 workers and then 6 specialists. They have little names on their chests like Superman, which was kind of funny. And they can trigger very specific actions on her player board if she has the appropriate specialist. But every specialist, as long as it is in play, if it's either on a ship or on her moon base, she has to pay them for their specialist abilities. But then she does have the ability, as you always do, you just usually don't want it, to send those workers back home to Earth so she doesn't have to pay them. She struggled quite a good bit with that faction. I did okay with mine, but I did make some crucial mistakes early. I just kind of naturally assumed that I needed certain materials coming from Earth, which you need in the normal base game, not realizing that, again, as robots, I was not going to need habitation pieces or food or whatever. And so I had a bunch of stuff on the moon that I literally could not do anything with. That was kind of my mistake. However, my buddy Jeff, using these cyborgs, just clobbered us all in score. He was able to very quickly kind of establish himself and just built up this big base. He had some slightly extra costs or slightly increased costs he had to pay to manage these cyborgs. But other than that, they ran themselves pretty easily. And so we had 100-point swings between first and second, and again between second and third place. And it made me kind of nervous that these factions aren't exactly balanced. I even chatted with one of the sort of co-designers or, sort of a friend of the development team. And he said, well, yeah, the cyborgs are kind of your easy faction, and the robots and the specialists are the harder ones. And there's two other ones kind of in between us. Well, that's kind of great. But what if you're playing with a bunch of people on the same skill level? Then you're going to have one person who's going to do great and everyone's going to do slightly worse because they don't know how to play that faction, because it's a greater challenge. So I'm a little worried about that. I'm going to try and give this a couple more plays, at least doing some solo rounds. I do like this game solo. I think I mentioned it in one of my top 10 games, solo videos. Anyways, going to check this one out some more and kind of develop a more thorough opinion of it. Anyways, that is Lunar Rush Innovations. And the last game I played just the other day, I mentioned it actually just yesterday, I mentioned this one already, was Underwater Cities. My friend Mike asked me to bring this over and teach. Luckily, they all watched the video beforehand, which is pretty good because this is a pretty difficult game to teach. Another game, though, where you're quite beholden to the luck of the draw. This is a game where I can't really explain this in detail because it's a fairly heavyweight game, but you are trying to establish cities underwater, sort of similar in concept to the game of Deep Shelf that I've mentioned many times here in the channel. But it's sort of a worker placement game. You're putting out these little tokens. I've got some deluxe components, or mine are kind of like little plastic submarines, and you're putting these out onto various worker spots around the board and then playing a card, hopefully of the same color. And if you're able to play a card of the same color of the action space that you triggered, then you get to sort of activate that card, or at least put that card in play in front of you. They may be engine building elements, they may be production options that you get later on throughout the game. They might be endgame scoring. They might be an action that you can toggle later. They may be an immediate effect that fires off the moment that you play it. And all that's great if you're getting the right cards that you need when you need them. The other thing is that, like most worker placement games, when a spot gets used, it is used for the rest of that round. In a 4-player game, there is one little token that you can buy for $1 to then go where someone else has already gone, but then that's it for that round. So you have to place your 3 workers, and you get one chance for someone to go where someone else already is. And so at 4 players, we found it kind of interesting. Early in the game, when you didn't really have any resources, those resource spots were taken up very quickly, and we were sitting there just starving to get anything done. Middle of the game, we started to get some production going, and then we were trying to start using those resources to build stuff, to expand our underwater cities. But all those spots got taken up really quickly. So then, you're kind of like, well, I can get resources, but I don't need them. I need to build stuff, and I can't do that now. And so it was kind of weird. I have to wonder if the sweet spot for this game is at 3, because then there's a lot more spaces that open up. At 4, again, it's just very, very, very tight. I did get a lot of cards played to my tableau. I had some pretty interesting effects that would fire if I could not play a card of the right color. But since, again, I still don't want to do that, I didn't really get to use it all that often. I did fall quite behind in the scoring of this game, but I did finish only about 6 points behind first place with 1 player in between me and them. So it was still a good game. I mean, it's one of my favorite games. It's just one of those games where kind of going into it sometimes you're like, I don't know if I'm mentally prepared for this game because it's very, very difficult. It's very, very tight. Again, it's still pretty swingy. and it just sort of depends, but I have always seen fairly tight scores with this. There's been a couple times my wife and I have played this, and we finished within 2 or 3 points of each other, and at least one game where we tied even at the end. So very tight game, despite that, sort of, at least the feeling of Desserts being a lot of luck to it. Anyways, Underwater Cities, great game. And that is it for Recently Played Games. That is almost it for the episode. The question of the week for next week. So I'm going to make this one kind of simple. And a quick shout out. We still get a lot of people watching this episode, watching this series. Not a lot of new commenters, so feel free to kind of jump into the conversation. I'd love to hear from some new people. The question for this week is, we are just about halfway through the month. This is the end of June. Halfway through I said end of the month. Yeah, I said end of the month. I'm tired, and I've still got lawnmowers going off all over the place. We're halfway through 2025 is what I'm trying to say. And I'm curious, how many games have you gotten to play that have come out this year already? And do you have a favorite so far coming into the halfway point of the year? So that's the question for the week. Looking forward to hearing your answers. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for the comments. As always, if you're here in the U.S., have a happy 4th of July coming up this weekend. Stay safe, and we'll chat with you soon. Cheers.